Now, Tricia does talk about different aspects of her near-death experience, and so I wanted you to hear her talk about these two features, the speed with which things happen, and also this term ineffability, which means that the person cannot express in English language what they experienced in the near-death experience, because English language was designed to describe this reality, not something that doesn't function by the same rules as this reality. So you'll hear her talk a little bit about that. Oops, wrong thing. Let's try that again.
I didn't want to look at certain things, so if my mind decided that I didn't want to look at something, then I didn't have to. And so it was almost as if there was a choice, just like once I started leaving the room, that could happen quicker than one would imagine. It's just like you imagine yourself out of the room and then you're out of the room. And so I guess the main thing is that things happen at a faster speed, and that, yeah, you don't experience life in the same way that we do within a body. There's less limits.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like although all these things were happening at once, that you didn't feel overwhelmed.
No, in fact, I felt like I was ready to experience more and learn more. So even though things were happening at a fast rate, I was comparing it to life inside a body, and I knew that it was faster, but I also knew it could be much faster, that I could still learn more, I could still receive more information. I just might not know, and I still don't know how to translate some things that happened from the other side into words and explain that here. And that might be a lifelong journey, or it might just be a feeling, that of peace that can't be translated into words.
I thought this comment of hers was interesting in that here we are 14 years later, and she's still in the process of figuring out, am I going to be able to get better and better at explaining what I experienced, or do I just need to accept that I'll never be able to explain it? And this process that is part of the integration process that researchers have found actually does take on average about 7 years. If the longer, the deeper the near-death experience. So what I mean by that is, Trish's experience is very elaborate. It has a lot of the features of NDEs. But some people, like I know a gal at UNT who was in a car accident and her car rolled over several times before it came to rest. And she said the minute that the tires first left the ground, she popped out of her body. She saw the car roll over and over and over and over and land, and people started running toward the car, and she was back in her body. That also is a near-death experience. It's just a relatively shallow one, and I don't mean a judgment by that, but just that there's only one feature. She was out of her body and then she was back, as opposed to Tricia, who had an elaborate out-of-body experience, even getting out above the city of Austin, and then went into transmaterial domain, met her deceased grandparents, met spiritual entities even in the operating room. And that's another thing that's, I'm glad I mentioned that, because even though I talk about the material aspect and the transmaterial aspect, they do sometimes overlap, like the entities that were in the surgery theater actually interacting with the surgeons, unbeknownst to them. So another thing I want to mention is in the previous excerpt, when Tricia said she was looking at the pasture and she saw all these lights, and the lights represented students that she would interact with in the future. And she said, she made a little comment where she said, initially, she said, I'd be telling this story initially to students. And I've often wondered if among the lights that she saw were us. All the people who hear her story. She also has, I connected her to the producers of I Survived Beyond and Back. Have some of you seen that TV show? Yeah. And she was actually on that as well. Of course, they do such a shallow job of they do 3 people in 1 hour, and you just can't get into any depth. But still, people have heard a little bit about her story there. So here's Tricia talking about the hyper-reality of the experience.
A lot of times people asked me afterwards, well, how do you know that's real? And I'm like, well, it was more real than this real. So as we're sitting here having coffee, right now I know that there could be angels all around us. There could be something we don't see right now. And this is less real than that experience. And that's, I think, what has stayed with me. It's more real than any dream, because there was an element of this reality that I know was reality, plus another reality.
About her stepfather vending the candy bar. I didn't include this, I don't think, among the excerpts that I kept in this presentation, but in this interview she did tell me too that when she regained consciousness from the surgery, only her mother was there. And when she was able to talk, she said to her mother, thank you for your prayers. I heard you praying. And her mother's like, what? And she said, yeah, at one point I was out, I was out of the surgery room, and I saw you literally on your knees praying, and I could hear what you were praying. I know you were praying to yourself silently, but I heard you say this and this and this. And Dad was standing next to you, and her mother was, of course, amazed. And then Tricia said she did this very purposely. She said to her mother, and she said her stepfather's name. I don't remember what it was, Joe, let's say. And she said, where was Joe? I saw you, I saw Dad there, but I couldn't see Joe. And her mother said, well, it was kind of awkward for him. Your dad came to the hospital, and even though, of course, we've been divorced, you're our child. And Joe kind of felt like a fifth wheel, so he went off and took a walk. And that's why he wasn't there. And she said, oh, yeah, and you know what, Tricia? Really weird? When he came back, you'll never believe this. He was eating a candy bar. Tricia said, I believe it. So the deeper, meaning the more NDE features a person has in their near-death experience, the more profound the after effects. And the after effects are really, for many people, nothing short of transformative. There are psychological after effects. People become they actually lose their fear of death. So it's not that they become less fearful. NDEers say, I know what happens when I die, so I have nothing to fear. They still fear the dying process. Nobody wants to suffer and, that sort of thing. But death itself holds no fear for the vast majority of NDEers. There are profound shifts in people's values. People become, for example, less materialistic and more altruistic. So they're less concerned about things like fame and fortune. They're more concerned about other people's welfare and contributing to other people's welfare. People also have, there's this kind of paradoxical thing. They have an enhanced sense of self-esteem. And that's because they learn in their experience that their life has meaning, and that there is a universe that is concerned about them and their well-being. And at the same time, they're more humble, because they also realize that the universe is a much vaster phenomenon than they ever had understood before. Definitely come back with a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And as I said, the purpose usually can be sort of boiled down to loving and learning. And interestingly, one of the questions that has sometimes come up is, if the vast majority of near-death experiences are this, profoundly pleasurable experience, and people, like the gal at dinner last night, she was talking about how she did not want to come back. It felt very good where she was. and she did not want to return. And she was told, as some NDEers are, about half of NDEers are told that they have to come back, or they simply are back in their bodies. Wait a minute, I'm saying that wrong. About half of them are just find themselves back in their bodies, and the other half are told or made to come back, sometimes against their will, as was the case with this gal last night. So then there are also spiritual after effects, and those include a deeper sense of spirituality. Actually, most NDEers move away from organized religion because they find that it actually now represents a barrier in their sense of connectedness to something that's higher. But a few NDEers become more involved in their religion. So there's no hard and fast rule, but there are tendencies for people to become more spiritual but not more religious. Also, other spiritual after effects, if you want to put them in the spiritual category, is NDEers tend to become more psychic after their NDEs. They see the future, they see dead people, they a lot of times have profound empathy for other people. Sometimes people who are fresh from their near-death experience would hate to be in a room like this, because all these people with all of their concerns and thoughts and reactions, and the person has this, it's like there's no boundary, and they're just overwhelmed with it. So sometimes people after NDEs withdraw because it's just too overwhelming to be around a lot of people.
Did they do any studies on why some were told to come back and why some were put back?
Yeah, well, that question I actually will answer in a broader way, because the question is has research revealed anything about why some people are just back and others are told to come back and others are like forced to come back? And in a broader context, any question you can ask about near-death experiences, the answer is research has not revealed any answer. And so, for example, let's drop back to the big picture. Of all the people who survive a close brush with death, about 1 in 5 will report a near-death experience, and the other 4/5 will report that they remember nothing. Research has not been able to identify any differences between those two groups. And then among people who've had near-death experiences, it seems like 90% will have a pleasurable experience, like you heard Tricia talk about, and 10% will have a distressing experience. And we'll talk about this in a little more depth here in a little bit. Research also has not revealed a difference between those two groups. And the first thing people usually think is, well, maybe bad people have bad experiences, they get punished for being nasty. But that is not supported by research. For example, a well-known NDEer, Dannion Brinkley, some of you may have heard him talk or read his book, was an assassin for the U.S. military during Vietnam. And when he was years later electrocuted accidentally, of course, he had a very pleasurable experience. So if anybody deserved to get a hand slap in the afterlife, it was him. He killed people. But also in his life review, he relived all those moments. And he remembered, for example, a time when he shot a Vietnamese general. Yes, thank you.
And he's defending the country?
Yes, yeah, but still, murder's murder, But let me finish, and I think it'll make sense. He experienced not only what that person felt in the last, few moments of their life, but how that person's death affected everybody that was connected to him. And it was awful. It was horrible to feel the pain that he had caused by killing this person. So that's it's like even in the predominantly pleasurable experiences, those moments in the life review can be really difficult. And then conversely, I have a friend who had a distressing experience. She's a minister, and but she had the experience when she was giving birth to her second child. She had had a really experience of hell on earth in her first childbirth, and now, so as she anticipated the second one, she was very anxious and in kind of a bad place psychologically, and it could be that the psychological state of mind that the person is in right as they're on the brink of the experience may influence the experience. That, you know, it may be that people take that mindset with them and that it helps to create what kind of experience they're going to have. That's the closest we've come, and it certainly isn't always the case, because there are cases of people who were walking down the street and got hit on the head from behind, completely unanticipated by them, instantly lost consciousness, and then had a distressing experience. So it's not, you know, the person didn't have time to get into a bad place psychologically. So the short answer is any question you can ask about why some people have this and others have that, and some people have the experience and others don't, and could there be a difference in related to age and gender and socioeconomic status, education, sexual orientation, pre-existing religious beliefs, anything you can think of, the answer is heaven only knows, because research hasn't indicated anything clear. Yes?
And some of these NDEs, are people not seeing deceased pets?
Yes, people have seen deceased pets. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have.
I'm so glad I got
That's nice to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to the after effects. There are social after effects, including that if there's relationship stress because the NDE has changed. And specifically, one of my doctoral students did her dissertation on the effects of a near-death experience on a marriage. And what she found is what the research had already indicated, but she did the first really systematic study of it. And it is that if a person has an NDE while they're married, their chances of divorce are very high. And that's because the NDEer is not the same person who said, I do. And so if the couple's values diverge, their lives diverge. But there are a few cases where the spouse was actually had values closer to near-death experiences than the near-death experiencer originally. The NDEer has their NDE, their values come closer to their spouse, and they report that they actually have a happier relationship than ever before. So the important factor seems to be whether after the NDE, the people's values diverge or converge. And if they go this way, they divorce. If they go like this, they stay together and they're happier than ever. There is a shift towards service-oriented careers. And you saw this with Tricia. She was this self-centered, didn't know what she would do with her life. And she got what I call really good career counseling in her near-death experience. You know, she was shown the students who she would be telling her story to. And she, as I said, all these years, she's been an English teacher at community college. And there are also physical after effects. Interestingly, and again, one of my doctoral students did the first systematic study of this, that near-death experiencers report more often that electrical devices malfunction in their presence. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. The lights go on and off, remotes function by themselves when the person's just walking through the room, computers crash. This is actually not a fun thing to have in this day and age. And you can imagine sometimes the challenges of recording near-death experiencers. One time I was recording another interview, and as the interview went on, the person was talking about their electromagnetic after effects, and when we finished the recording, the guy who was doing the recording said, well, that explains it. He said, when we first started recording, he said, I was hearing a sound through my earpiece that I have never heard before. And I had to do some adjusting. He said, I don't really think that anything I did fixed it. He said after a couple of minutes it just reduced and went away. And that's probably because the NDEer was like emotionally aroused at the beginning of the, like, oh boy, I'm about to be interviewed, and they're mucking up the electrical works. So it does seem like the near-death experience changes the person physiologically as well as psychologically and spiritually. And there are also changed bodily functions. NDEers often talk about how they don't need as much sleep as they used to, and they are more...
I think it took, especially my friends, an adjustment period. Some did leave my life, other new ones came in immediately, but some people have stayed from that time forward, and I don't think that they liked me that much. Right after my accident, they thought I was a bit of a downer because I wanted to talk about God or the light or, things that 21-year-olds, would rather go, hey, let's go have a drink and, like, talk about, relationships or talk about school or talk about plans. And I was much more philosophically concerned. And so some of my new friendships with people were older than me, and meditation groups and yoga groups, and so I definitely was gravitating toward a more metaphysical crowd. Before my accident, I was deathly afraid to talk in front of crowds. After my accident, all of that fear had evaporated because I knew that what I had to say was important, and I knew that I had to stand in front of people and talk, and that it wasn't so much about me, it was more about the message. And so for the first time I was disconnected from, oh, what are they thinking about me? And then oddly, you're more successful that way because you're not self-conscious in a sense, and you do realize that I'm here for you, not for me. So I can say that when I was closer to the NDE, I was very almost innocent and childlike. Like, I saw the beauty in every person that I encountered, and then like a child, I kind of have grown up in a sense since then, hardened myself to not letting people in so easily, and being more discriminatory about who it is that I'm going to get close to. And what has not changed though is teaching is still a joy, that I still feel that no matter how complicated or strange my life may be at times, teaching is always clear, and it always works, and it is definitely where I feel most centered and at home and at peace is working with other people. And I could not have imagined myself that way before the accident. I think that I would have been a horrible teacher because I would have been totally self-absorbed instead of truly concerned about other people's lives. And I'll go back a bit. The first couple of years after the accident, I joined a meditation group, and I sought out people who may have more of a focus, a spiritual focus. And so I went to hear shamans speak, and I went and I was searching, at many levels. I kind of hoped. I read Carlos Castanado's books, and I hoped that I might have some type of mentor that would guide me through this practice. And I had a few psychic experiences that I didn't know how to handle, and so I asked that they go away because I couldn't handle them. I thought, I just want to finish my studies, I want to be a little bit more grounded. I just didn't have the tools really to deal with that amount of information. I thought, well, it would have been great to have had someone to guide me, but I didn't find anyone, and so a lot of that shut down. And there's been times in my life when I thought, okay, I'm ready for it to open up a bit more, and yet It has come through dreams only, so my dreams at night, and that seems to be the way I can handle it, that sometimes I know what might happen the next day, or if something is looming in the future that is negative, then I'm a little bit more prepared for it. And that has stayed with me, and that did not happen to me as a child or before the NDE.
Later in the interview, I asked her to give an example of the kind of psychic experience that she asked to discontinue. And she said that she, at the time, after she was recovered, she was working as a waitress in a restaurant. And one day she was going along, and she suddenly had this awareness of a future scene where she was there, in her job, and she would be conversing with a client, and then she would turn to go to place the order, and someone would say something, and someone would say something over here, and she'd look back, and then out the window she'd see a man walking by, walking his dog. And it just kind of preoccupied her, but then she finally forgot about it, and that very day, later that day, she said it happened exactly the way she was conversing with this client, and suddenly she realized it's happening. And then she heard someone over here, and she turned, and then someone said something over here, and she looked out the window, and there was the man with the dog. And she said, that sounds kind of innocuous, but these things would happen several times a day, and it was very disorienting. And she said, I really needed it to stop so I could get on with my life. So that was her experience.